I think most artists would prefer to have somebody else critique their artwork because those of you who are artists probably know how challenging it can be to step outside of your own head, right? Because you're in the studio, you're making your artwork, it all makes sense to you, perfect sense. But then I'm sure you've had this experience. You take that artwork, you show it to somebody else, and they have no idea what you were trying to do, or they notice things that in retrospect you really think you should have noticed but couldn't because you're just so biased when it comes to your own artwork. And that's just the way it is. That has nothing to do with experience. That's the exact same thing that I struggle with. So ideally you want to do that, and we do have a lot of options for that here at Art Prof because we do have free live art critiques here on YouTube. You can go to artprof.org, click on critiques, and you can find out how to submit your artwork. But the thing is, that's not always an option. And a lot of the times, you can't get a critique when you need it. Like if you submit to us, it takes us some time, we got to put you into the schedule. It's not something that you can get right away. And so sometimes you're in a particular situation, and really the only option you have is to try to critique yourself, which has its inherent challenges. And I know for myself it's challenging as well. And honestly, I don't really trust myself when it comes to evaluating my artwork. So much of the time, I'm just dead wrong or at least way off. But I do think you can think about yourself as the first pass. And then beyond that, later on, you can go get feedback from another artist. So I'm going to show you guys 5 things you can do to do your own self evaluation process. And if you're joining us, please let me know in the chat if self critique is something that you do, if it's something that you struggle with, if you have any tips that you'd like to offer the rest of us, because it's not the easiest thing to critique yourself, but I think it's inevitable. I think you're going to have to do it at some point. And so I'm going to give you a couple strategies that hopefully will make that a little bit easier. Number one, write a checklist. I think that the checklist can really fluctuate. You could have a really basic checklist that just reviews all of the essentials for visual art. You could say, okay, composition, you could talk about space, color scheme, contrast, textures. But I also really like the idea of making a customized checklist for that particular artwork or series of artworks that you're working on, because not every single artwork I think has the same intent or the same goal. I mean, if you're working in black and white, of course, color scheme is not really an issue. And so I like the idea of just taking the time and just saying, okay, did I think about light and shadow? Did I consider the composition? Did I think about contrast? How am I doing in that area? Because one of the things on this particular checklist that I find a lot of students really just don't even think about is composition. And it's not because they don't understand composition or that they can't do composition. Most of the time, they just didn't think about it. They just never occurred to them to consider that composition is something they should do. And so a lot of this actually, for a lot of people, it's really just reminders. Is to say, hey, did you forget about this? Did you make sure you considered that? That's very important because, wow, there are some really basic things that you can overlook in 2 seconds, not because you're being ignorant, but just because you don't think about it. I mean, this is a very practical example, but I once went, I was doing a lecture and I was going to have it recorded. And I had somebody come up and set everything up for me, but it was up to me to actually start the recording and everything. Guess who did not plug in the sound? I was like, great. So I got home. I'm like, oh, this is very useless. I have this video with no sound. And so now, whenever I set up a video shoot, I have a checklist and it says things like plug in the sound, turn on the on button, like really like idiot proofing the process. And so I think an artist checklist can be a similar thing. You want to create what I call a fresh pair of eyes. Now, what I mean by that is when you're working on an artwork and you've been staring at it for hours and hours and everything looks the same and you can't see straight, you have to trick yourself into having a fresh pair of eyes. Oh, good morning, Dryad. Jump into the chat, guys. Tell me if you self critique, if you avoid it, if it's something you struggle with, and why. I'm very curious because I think we all do it, but maybe not very deliberately. Or maybe we do and we're really annoyed at ourselves half the time, which is more like what I go through. But basically, the way to create a fresh pair of eyes is to make the artwork, not critique it right away, put it away, and then come back. That is really, really important because every single time I have made some decision about an artwork right when I'm making it, it's always the worst decision. Because sometimes I'm in the heat of the moment and I'm making the work. My decision making process is all over the place. And I've been looking at things for too long. You can't get any distance. So I have something that I call the 2 week rule, which basically means that after I make something, I put it away in a place where I can't see it, like in a portfolio somewhere, and I don't look at it for 2 weeks. And it's incredible. 2 weeks later, you really do feel like you're seeing a new piece that you've never experienced before. And that distance is very, very useful. Hello, Iodeji. You are saying, strong believer in self critique. It's essential to be a good artist. Struggle with it because whenever you start a project, my desire to make it perfect often causes me to become married to my work. I think that is exactly what every single artist goes through. It's so hard to separate yourself from your artwork. But that's why this 2 week distance, I think, is really, really good because I have definitely had drawings where when I was in the trenches making them, I thought, oh, this is horrible. I hate this drawing with a passion. I put it away 2 weeks later. I go, it wasn't that bad. And other times you're like, oh, this is terrible. Let's put this away. Anyway, get some distance. If you want to get some distance immediately, like let's say you don't have time to wait 2 weeks, what I sometimes do is if I'm working on a painting, I'll hold a mirror up to it and I'll look at the mirror reflection of the painting. So everything's in reverse. You can't always do that, but you can do it like once in a 2 hour session to trick yourself into seeing the painting differently. And another thing that I do as well is I'm working on a piece, I will try to make sure that I stand away from it at least 10 feet. Because sometimes I'm working with students in class and I'll say to them, look, guys, get up, get some physical distance between you and your artwork. Because sometimes you're working on a drawing, you're like drawing really, really close, you're not really looking at the whole thing. And students look at me, they go like this. I'm like, that doesn't count. I'm like, get up out of your stool and walk like 10 feet away and then look at your artwork and then tell me what you see. Because oftentimes, whenever I'm teaching figure drawing, students really cannot see the proportions very well when they're like this close to their drawing. But if you step back, it's like all of a sudden the proportions become very clear what's too big and what's too small. So that physical distance, just as important as that mental distance. Dryad saying in the chat, I dislike almost everything I've made. Only getting distance helps me to see. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us struggle with that as well, that when I'm making stuff, I just hate everything. But I think that for me, it's sort of like what degree of dislike. It's like, well, I don't totally passionately hate this one. I just remotely dislike it. So it sort of depends on how you want to rank that. And then sometimes I do this. If I'm working on a really big painting, let's say it's like 2 feet by 3 feet, it can help me sometimes. I'll just take a photo of it in my phone so that then I'm looking at a picture of my painting and it's like really, really small. Because when you look at a tiny version of your drawing and it's only like 2 inches tall, you have to look at it differently. In fact, you're more forced to consider the relationships in the composition when you're looking at a little thumbnail version of your piece, as opposed to when you're looking at the whole thing. Oh, hello, Darinka. Thank you for jumping into the chat. Tell me, all of you, what your process is with self-critique. If you do it, if you struggle with it, what you are doing to work with that. Another concrete thing I like to do is before I start working on something, I'll actually go through and I'll choose maybe an artist or two who I want to think about and consider from a technical point of view. And by the way, these tips that I'm going over with you, I think cover more so technique and execution. We'll probably have another stream that talks about how to critique your ideas because I think that's like a whole other can of worms. So for today, we're just going to talk about technique and the look and the making of your drawing. Let's see. Hello, Nanika. And Stephen Neckel is saying, you're sophomore in high school, you don't know where to start with your portfolio. What can you do? Okay, what I would say, Stephen, go to artprof.org, click on tutorials, and at the top, look for the section that says art school. Underneath it, there's a tutorial. It's called Art School Portfolios. In fact, it might be the link in the video description below, but it's the complete Art School Portfolios guide. Everything you need is in there, tutorials, resources. Check it out. If you can't find it, Stephen, comment on this video later and I'll send you the link. Let's see. Stephen's saying, also, I have my parents look at my art because they're harsh critique people. It works. Oh, wow. I never ask my parents to critique my artwork because it's like, oh, yeah, that's nice. That's pretty much it. I have never been able to rely on them for that. Dorinka saying, I ask my friends what they think about it. Then I compare their answers with my own interpretation. Also, as simple as, do I like it? That's a really good way to do it, Dorinka. I like how straightforward that is. And it's also nice, as you're saying, to almost solicit different opinions, compare them against yours, and see if there's a consensus, see if everybody disagrees. That's a really good way to do that. Excellent. Okay, so when I talk about referencing an artist, let's say there's a particular aspect of my painting technique that I want to get better at. Like, for example, this past summer, I spent all of August traveling in Utah and I was working primarily with watercolors. Watercolor is not my strong suit. I have never been a strong watercolor artist. And so I really felt like this summer I was trying to redeem myself, like tell myself, okay, you're not horrible at watercolor. Maybe you're half decent. But anyway, in order to do that, I started looking at a lot of watercolor paintings by Andrew Wyeth. And I started looking at them and thinking to myself, what is it that I really enjoy about Andrew Wyeth's watercolor paintings? And I guess I started up by saying, well, what is it that I don't like in certain watercolor paintings that I think I don't want to do? And one of the aspects I don't like is when watercolor paintings look really mushy, when they look too soft and there's no texture or almost crunch to the brushwork. So if you guys look at this Wyeth painting up close, you can see he does have some very fluid, washy areas like in the background. But what I really admired about Wyeth's paintings is that he does have these very harsh, very coarse, dry brush areas. And I looked at a lot of his paintings before I got started, and I said to myself, I set this as a goal before I started painting. I said, I want to do that. I want to do dry brush technique that achieves that crunchiness, that harshness, that bite in a watercolor painting, because that's not really what you expect from a watercolor painting. I think a lot of people expect more often for watercolor painting very loose and very washy, and I didn't really like that very much. So basically what happened, I was thinking for a while about, okay, dry brushings, make it crunchy, show texture. That is against what watercolor painting typically does. And so actually there was one day I was at my mother-in-law's house and she was making this bread that she makes like literally every other day that she makes it totally from scratch. It's the most incredible bread you've ever had in your entire life. And my kids call it Oma bread because she's their grandmother and they call her Oma. And the day that she took out this bread, I looked at it and I went, that's it. That texture on that bread has the crunch of those dry brush strokes that I see in those Andrew Wyeth paintings. And I was like, that's it. That's my subject. I have to paint that bread because that bread has that texture that I wanted in Andrew Wyeth's paintings. So I sat down. She was generous enough to let me just take over her entire dining room for an afternoon. And I did this bread painting in watercolor. And I just had so much fun. It was just one of those paintings. Everything just clicked. It was fantastic. And so sometimes I think if you look at another artist's technique and you try to get really specific about what part of their technique you maybe want to emulate or try out, it can just be a really good way to guide yourself. And then I had something to measure myself up against. So that was really nice to have that reference. Now, on the other hand, that can always sometimes work against you. So you got to be careful. You can't do this one all the time. So here's an example. There was this one day we were in Utah and we went to this like beautiful lake, and my father-in-law was there and he took my two kids fishing, and they had been fishing before. It was gorgeous. And I saw this lake and I was like, oh my God, I am stepping into a Winslow Homer painting. I was so excited. I was like, it could not be more perfect. I'm like, this is the light, the water, the landscape, the people. I was like, it's so perfect. So I was looking at all these Winslow Homer paintings. I was so excited about their simplicity, about the spontaneity of the watercolor brush work, but that it was also very controlled and really well painted. Thank you, Dryad. I actually have to say, I was surprised, you guys, that people like this painting so much, because to me, it was just so, I don't know, humble in a way, because we eat this bread all the time. Like, this is the bread my mother-in-law makes for us every single time we go over. But I don't know, maybe that's what came across to people. Maybe that intimate quality, that this isn't just any slice of bread, that this is bread that my mother-in-law made. And so there's a real meaning to this bread that I think isn't always present in a lot of still lives. Also, that's a lot of butter. By the way, that butter was not that big. That was like me over exaggerating the butter, because if you look at this, I don't think the butter is really that big. So anyway, so I was looking at these Winslow Homer paintings, and I was sitting there like, I'm like, okay, Clara, this is your moment. You're going to channel Winslow Homer. You're going to do it. And oh man, that was like the kiss of death. I was like, oh no, I shouldn't have done it. Like, I could not do it. It was such a bad day. Like, I started so many paintings that day, and this is the only one that's like not totally crummy. I mean, it's fine. It's just a little sketch of my daughter fishing. But I just remember that day thinking, why did I think about Winslow Homer? I would have been way better off if I hadn't thought about him at all. So sometimes that can work out against you. By the way, all of these paintings that I'm going to show you as a reference for this stream, they're all going to be in this tutorial on watercolor painting in Utah. This tutorial is not even close to being finished. It's probably going to take me a few months because it's going to be really long. It's very complicated. I did so many paintings in so many places, so it's going to be a while. But if you want to go to artprof.org tutorials, you can watch the preview video. So the preview video is just a minute. You can see all the paintings, all the places we went. I'm super excited for this tutorial, but it's just going to be a gargantuan amount of work to edit. Let's see. Nanika is saying, maybe that was your way to say that you need more butter. I always want more butter. Who doesn't want more butter? Plus, she has this particular Kerrygold butter that she serves that's like extra salty that my kids really like. So it's really hard to resist. Okay. Number 4, how to self-critique. If you set a goal that is based on a prior artwork, what that does is it gives you a point of comparison. Because let's say you make a single watercolor painting and then you say, okay, I finished the painting, now I want to evaluate it. Sometimes it's hard to just look at that one painting by itself. And so what I'm saying is, if you contextualize that painting, if you compare that painting to a previous piece, knowing that you were aiming to do something particular with the new one, then you can compare the two. I find it much easier to do it that way because the flaws and the successes, they're just much, much more visible when you're looking at two paintings as opposed to just looking at one. So let's take a look at some examples of when I did that. This is also from the Utah tutorial that I just mentioned. And this was this just beautiful, tiny little cemetery in this town called Whitso in southern Utah. And it's a very strange place. I found it very kitschy, eerie, and also very sad. And I knew when we visited that cemetery, I was like, I got to go back there and draw. So I actually spent 2 days there drawing, and I had explored the space quite a bit, which really helped a lot. Actually, if you guys work on site, if you can get the opportunity to actually scout out the space, that can be really, really helpful because then you know a little bit better how to go about doing things. And so the first day that I went, again, I was on that Andrew Wyeth kick about wanting to do the dry brushing. And I always loved the way he painted grass and just sticks of leaves all over the place. And I wanted to really show that. Okay. So I did this cross with these fake flowers. And you can see here's how the final piece went. Okay. So what I did is I would step back, I would look at the piece and I'd say, okay, well, what is it that I don't like about this piece that maybe I want to change my goal for the next piece? Okay. So the thing is, I liked the brushwork. I did feel that at this point, I was really getting the hang of the dry brushing and getting more structural with my brushwork. So that was fine. But I was so disappointed in the way I used black. Like I was so mad. I was like, look at those beautiful cool and blue grays, how they fluctuate. And I just felt like this was such a gray painting. And I felt like that was really disappointing because one part of the cemetery that I really enjoyed was that there were some like crazy garish saturated colors because of all the fake flowers that were there. That was the other thing that was eerie about the cemetery is that there were no fresh flowers. Everything was fake flowers. And that was unusual too because it's out in the middle of nowhere. Like there was like nobody there. In fact, I was actually like just a little nervous painting there because I was like, you know what? If something happened to me, nobody would know. So because there was like no cell reception either. So that was like a little bit scary, but I got over it pretty fast, mostly. So I did this painting and I thought, okay, well, I got to go back the next day because I got to fix this. I got to do another study of the cemetery and I got to really milk those saturated colors because I did not do that in this painting. And so the next day I went and I found a setup that was way more colorful. Obviously, that was going to make my life a lot easier. And I really liked this particular grave area because it was these very, very bright orange tones. But then there's that, like that, I don't know if you guys can see, but in the middle of the leaves, let me show you the whole painting. There's this very strange, like turquoise greenish blue in the leaves. And it was very artificial looking, like no leaves really were that type of color. And I knew I really wanted to capture the dynamic between those two things, the oranges and the turquoise and the blue. Okay. So what I ended up doing was working on this one. And now I had two paintings from the same space that were trying to do different things. And so it was very interesting. I could say, okay, well, let's look at this piece. And now let's look at this piece. Okay. And I could say, okay, well, in this piece, I actually think I did better with the drawing part of it. I feel like there's a broader range of textures. When I look at this one, not so much. I feel like this one, the color got in the way of that a little bit. But I also think in this one, I overdid the pickiness. I feel like the drawing was a little bit overdone. It felt a little bit tired, a little bit overlabored. I feel like this one was a lot fresher. I feel like I stopped myself sooner because in watercolor painting, I have a real tendency to overwork. Like I really do not stop early enough. So I was actually very happy if you guys look at the pink flowers on the far left-hand side. I stopped those, I think, at just the right time, which is unusual. I almost never get to do that. Let's see. Stephen Neckel is saying, do you ever redo a painting like the first grave you showed us to get the effects you want to do, or do you just try and find a new subject? Stephen, most of the time I just do another one because I feel like unless I'm working on a series or I'm literally drawing the same thing over and over and over again for a very particular purpose, I think sometimes you end up just beating a dead horse. And it's like, I like to think about just absorbing what I learned from that first painting and then applying it to the next one. Because I have a lot of students who ask me after they do a homework assignment, they say, oh, well, I was really unhappy with the way my drawing came out this week. Would it be okay with you if I redid the drawing and came in next week with a new version? Most of the time I say to them, don't do that. Just think about what you learned this week and apply it to your next project because actually you're better off doing it that way, having a fresher start. So really interesting. let's see, Macros is saying maybe sun coloration, decoloration of plastic. Yeah, I mean, I really would have to show you photos and video footage of the cemetery. Like, I've never seen a place like this in my life. And I looked, there was like this whole section with like an article, and there were like the names of the people. It's such a strange place. I'll have to show it in the tutorial. Obviously, I will be doing that, but that's going to be a little while. But that was very. I mean, this is not even the strangest of the graves. I mean, there were some graves that had like these really kitschy, like fake birds that still had price tags on them from like Michaels and stuff. Like, it was a very strange place. I mean, that's one of the reasons I was so attracted to it. But I just find that when you have two paintings, you compare them against each other, it's a little bit easier to see the differences. I mean, granted, these two paintings that I'm showing you, they are very different from each other, but they were done within the same span of 2 days. And yet, I do think that even in that short span of time, I did learn quite a bit in the process. Okay. Number 5, I would say, is to identify what your tendencies are. Because I think this is every artist. I think we all have tendencies. One of my tendencies when I draw the human figure, if I'm doing gesture drawing or something like that, I always make the legs too short. Always. So if I don't think about it, they're just going to be too short. So anytime I sit down, I'm drawing the figure from life, I have to say, Clara, make the legs longer. You're going to draw them too short. And if I don't do that, forget it. In the chat, Marlena is saying, it always amazes me when stepping back 10 to 12 feet from the work, how it looks and what it needs. I know, isn't it weird? And it's like, it has to be at least 10 or 12 feet. I mean, it depends on where you're working, but sometimes if I'm in a really big classroom, I'll make the students put their paintings on one wall and we'll literally like run to the other side of the room. And then you really feel like you're looking at something different. I mean, it's almost jarring to see that, but I think you need to do that to get that fresh pair of eyes that you otherwise would never get to have. So you identify your tendencies and you go into the next couple of pieces trying to say to yourself, how am I going to deal with those tendencies? Because I really don't have problems drawing legs the appropriate size once I think about it. But if I don't, I just go on automatic pilot. And I think a lot of us do that. So for example, this is also from the Utah tutorial. And the Utah tutorial is sort of unusual because I always think about a tutorial as somebody really being an expert in that field that they're teaching. But I am actually calling this Utah tutorial a learning tutorial. So you're going to watch me learn. So there's a lot of not so hot paintings in that tutorial, and this is one of them. And I was so mad at myself after I did this painting because we went to this amazing place in southern Utah called Goblin Valley. And it's an alien planet, like not even joking. If you guys have ever seen, there was that old movie called Galaxy Quest. It was like a spoof of Star Trek. And there's this one scene where they land on this alien planet. That is Goblin Valley. Like literally, they didn't do anything to it. Like it's just the actors running around and it looks like an alien planet. And I was so excited to paint this landscape. And we drove so long to get there. And I did this landscape and I was so mad because I just really overdid it with the black. Because here's the thing, I know this about myself, that I am not very strong in color. And so oftentimes to compensate for my lack of skill in color, I will actually just go for the blacks. I will try to rely on light and dark contrast to define things as opposed to using color. And I know that's a weakness that I have. And the thing is, like, to me, adding contrast and adding black feels so simple and obvious that it's just something I do because I know I can. And that's exactly what happened here. But the thing is, in watercolor, you can't really do that. Because in watercolor, if you start adding those blacks too soon, you eliminate a lot of possibilities. And so this is what I was really battling the first half of that trip in that tutorial was like, Clara, come on, quit it. Like, would you please stop making everything so contrasty in black within like the first quarter of the painting? And I was like really mad at myself after I did this painting. And I said, okay, this is my tendency. when I paint with watercolor, I tend to rely on black to carry the form, to define the form, and I gotta quit that. I have to try to make a watercolor painting where the black does not enter the piece until like the last 5% of the painting. I gotta restrain myself from doing that so that when I use the black paint, it's really there for a very particular reason and it's not to bail out my lack of color. Mark Cross is saying it's a black watercolor or ink. It's all watercolor. I didn't use any ink because I feel like India ink, I love it, but I love it by itself. I felt like it would have interfered with the watercolor. What I did do actually for this drawing is it does have a little bit of marker in it, alcohol-based Tombow markers, and I actually found that to be really nice because I was so terrified of watercolor that starting some of it with marker and enhancing some of my watercolor paintings with the marker as well, I sort of think about it as training wheels. Like I couldn't just get on the bike and go. I needed the training wheels of the marker. And the marker was really nice because whenever I felt like the watercolor was too out of control and had a mind of its own, I felt like the marker could pull things back and give me something a little bit more solid to hold on to. And it was interesting because by the time I was done with the trip, that bread painting that I had showed you guys earlier, that was actually entirely 100%. So this painting is all watercolor. There's no marker in it, but this one has a lot of marker in it because at this point I was still freaking out a little bit about the watercolor. And Dryad is asking in the chat, do you use straight black or do you mix your blacks in watercolor? I mostly mix them. Actually, I think the color I was most reliant on to make blacks was probably Prussian blue. And I usually mixed it with burnt umber, sometimes burnt sienna, but burnt sienna is a little bit too orange. But I had not really used Prussian blue that much, and I really enjoyed it for this. And I became very reliant on it for the summer. I mean, I sort of gave myself the excuse of, Clara, you're really bad at watercolor. Come on, you got to do something. So that was how I did it. So anyway, I made this Goblin Valley picture. And so I said to myself, okay, you're going to sit down, you're going to do something else, and you're going to do the dry brushing thing, and you're not going to do any black until the very last minute. And so actually what happened was I went mushroom hunting with my father-in-law, my 2 kids, and my husband. It was so fun, and we have tons of video footage of it in the tutorial that you guys are going to get to see. And I kept thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this is such a cool thing. Like, this bums me out because you can't like paint while you mushroom hunt. Like, it doesn't really work that way. And then I was looking at our huge haul of mushrooms. I mean, the bag was like heavy, like it was hard to carry. I was like, I'm gonna paint the mushrooms. This is awesome. So excited. Oh, hello, 10,000 crows. And so basically I sat down with the mushrooms, and it was really nice because it was a controlled situation. It's not like I was out in the field or something. And I sat down, I had that plan, and it worked. I did this one paint. This was the first one that I did. And I don't know, things just click sometimes. I just said, this is it. I know how to do this now. And so you can see if you look at this and some of these other ones, sure, there are areas where I let it fly in terms of the black, but I didn't do it until the very end. And I think that's a pretty big difference. And for example, the bottom part of this mushroom, where I think normally I would have put in like a really dark shadow, I really restrained myself. Now, this is all contextual. I mean, for some people, maybe this is still way too much black. But for me, this was like, wow, you use like half what you normally use. And so I think just really being conscious of what you tend to do so that you can formulate some type of strategy can be very, very useful. Dryad says, you use ultramarine burnt umber. It's really lively because the ultramarine granulates a lot. Yeah, I like ultramarine a lot too. I tend to use ultramarine more when I'm oil painting, but Lauren Welch, one of the teaching artists here at Art Prof, she turned me on to Prussian blue, so I was all excited to use it this summer. Let's see. Nanika saying you were on the Portfolio Crit Marathon. Oh, you mean 10,000 Crows? Yeah, 10,000 Crows was on there, Zoe Resner, so you guys can check that out. I needed like 48 hours to recover from that. I swear I felt like I had jet lag afterwards from Asia. It was insane. It's like, wow, I'm not 18 anymore. When I was in art school, I used to do that like 3 times a week. And now I'm like, I need 2 days to recover. I'm an old lady now. It's like really, really sad. But anyway, yeah, check out that video because, dude, you guys, we streamed for 9 hours. That was like really incredible. I really cannot believe that we actually did that. Anyway, guys, I hope that you'll explore some other related videos. We've got a video on why you're being rejected as an artist, how you can find your style, how to stay motivated, and I hope you will subscribe to our channel so that you can continue to grow as an artist and get tips, and to ring the bell to make sure you don't forget anything. And thank you again to our top supporters who make all of this possible. Thank you to all of you for showing up for the stream, for listening, for your contributions. I hope you guys have a good night, and I'll see you next time.